Welcome to the Bill Walton Show, featuring conversations with leaders, entrepreneurs, artists, and thinkers. Fresh perspectives on money, culture, politics, and human flourishing. Interesting people, interesting things.
Welcome to the Bill Walton Show. I'm Bill Walton. Well, today I am delighted to be joined by Amy Chua, who's one of my most, words fail actually. She's one of my favorite thinkers on the planet. I've been following Amy's career as a writer for the last, 15, 16 years, and she's written fabulous books on culture, world politics, really explaining, and political tribes most importantly, really explaining, I think, perceptively the various divisions in the world, and also more recently in Political Tribes, describing the divisions that affect America today. And let me try holding up the book here. Anyway, Amy's most recent book, let me complete the intro a little bit. Amy's fairly underaccomplished. She's a professor at Yale Law School, went to Harvard Law School. Her husband's also a professor at Yale Law School, and they're one of the leading charismatic figures on campus, although sometimes their views fall outside the norm at Yale, which I think is very good. So anyway, today we want to talk about her book, which is called The Golden Gate, which is being published as we speak. When is that? Been released?
Just out.
Just came out.
Yeah.
And I can't do any plot spoilers here because I've only got 2/3 the way through it, although one of our digital producers, Maureen Sullivan, behind camera 3, has finished it, and she's promised that she won't tell us how it comes out. So, Amy, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I mean, I've had a lot of fascinating people on the show, but I think you're probably at the top of the charts in my book.
Thank you. It's really an honor.
Yeah.
Likewise.
Yeah. So after writing, and I do want to talk about many of your other books, but after writing nonfiction, you decided to write a novel. What was the impulse?
Interestingly, I have always wanted to write a novel. I just never quite had a plot. When I was little, as you know, I am the eldest daughter of very strict Chinese immigrant parents. They were the original Tiger parents. And we were held to extremely high standards and weren't allowed to do a lot of wild socializing. So I was a huge bookworm. I mean, all I did is read all the time. I would go to the public library, come back with my arms filled with books, and they were always mystery books. Agatha Christie, every single one. And the way this happens, I'm still going to write nonfiction. It's not like I'm moving away for that. But I tried to write a novel when I was in my 20s, when I was trying to leave my corporate law firm. It just wasn't working for me. But I just couldn't figure out a good plot. And then 3 years ago, I was sitting in my parents' house. They live in the San Francisco Bay Area, in the Claremont Hotel neighborhood. And this plot just came to me.
Where the book is set.
Where the book is set, yes. And I won't give it away either, but the idea was a grandmother from one of the wealthiest established families is told on page 1 that one of her 3 granddaughters is a murderer, but they don't know which one. And I have a big twist, which you haven't gotten to yet. I won't say anything. But the whole thing kind of came to me, that structure. And I was so excited. And I ran it was Christmas time. So I ran to my daughters. Do you think this is a good idea? My nieces and nephews. And then finally, the whole setting came together because I don't know if you know this. My parents currently live in Madame Chiang Kai-shek's former house. For reasons nobody knows, Madame Chiang Kai-shek lived in Berkeley, California from 1943 to 1944. And nobody knows why. The First Lady of China was living in Berkeley by herself.
Well, without giving away the plot, and I won't because this is in the first or second chapter, the book opens roughly with the murder of a political figure in the United States who'd run for president in 1940.
Yes.
And the book has said you've got it 3 times, I guess, 1930, 1937, and 1944. You jump between them very effectively. But in 1944, he's murdered.
Yes.
In the hotel. And his name is Walter Williamson in the book. Wilkinson. but I grew up in Indiana,
Yes,
and I
you
think you
know.
named him after Wendell Willkie.
He is. He's based. So I don't know if you knew this.
And Wendell Willkie was supposed to have had an affair
With Madame
with
Chiang Kai-shek? Yes. I read all these biographies. I don't think that actually happened, but they definitely were friends. They spent a lot of time together. I think she was trying to, I don't know, get him, politically to deliver and to support Taiwan or support, her husband. But I can't believe you know that, but that's who my fictional murder victim is based on.
Right.
And he actually died in 1944. Wendell Willkie actually died in 1944. And I built this whole fictional mystery around a lot of genuine historical facts.
Well, many people think he could have won in 1944.
I know. It's amazing. He came
So
very
I
close
can't
to
wait
FDR.
to find out what you do to this guy in the
Oh,
book.
no.
I'm beginning to think I'm figuring out who knocked him off and why.
Keep guessing.
So it's set in Berkeley and San Francisco, which is a world apart from today's San Francisco.
Oh my gosh.
Unfortunately, in many ways, fortunately in other ways, because you also talk about a class structure in San Francisco in the 30s, which was if you were white and you were wealthy, the world was your oyster. But if you were not white and if you're not wealthy, you were part of an underclass that just was not represented at all.
Yeah, when people say, "Oh, things are just getting worse and worse," I mean, America has changed so much. There've been so many
In good ways.
in good ways. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much equality. I mean, so yes, things that would never happen today. Like a million Mexican, I think, including citizens, were forcibly deported back to Mexico in 1930.
Is
Right
that
after
true?
the Depression.
That was not that actually happened?
Yeah,
I didn't
and I mean
know.
the estimates vary, but
Yeah.
this is right after the Depression, and there were no jobs. So you could understand. And of course, there was the Japanese internment in 1944, and what you were referring to. Berkeley is so just off the charts progressive now, but it was the opposite in the 40s and 50s and even early 60s. They were residential covenants. So in the Berkeley Hills, where my parents now live, only whites could live, and it would be on the deed. And it's funny because when Madame Chiang Kai-shek wanted to buy this house, she wasn't technically allowed to because she wasn't white. And the
bank said there were
Yes.
restrictions on deeds written into the deed
Yes.
itself that whites only.
right, and I think they still exist. But then the president of Wells Fargo Bank in San Francisco was mortified. He's like, "She's the first lady of China. This is very embarrassing." So he stepped in and intervened, and and she was able to live there. But yeah, so it's completely different now. Of course, all of California is completely different.
And your protagonist in the book,
Yeah, his name is Detective Al Sullivan, and I had so much fun with him, Bill. I have always loved these kind of classic
yeah, me too.
detectives of the golden age, like Sam Spade, Dashiell Hammett's,
Marlowe.
yeah, Philip Marlowe, and Humphrey Bogart, it was the kind of
Sure.
character. But I wanted to play with that because that's kind of old fashioned, a little cliched. So when you meet my Detective Sullivan, at first he seems just like that. He's a, tough guy, kind of noir detective. But then you quickly learn that his mother, you mentioned class, is a poor white. She's from the Dust Bowl, from
Oklahoma.
Okie. Yep.
She's an Okie. Yeah.
Okie.
Yeah.
And then on his other half, he is half Mexican and half Jewish, but he passes for white, that he looks white. So he, for reasons that are, I think very interesting, his real name is actually Alejo Gutierrez, but he chooses to go by his mom's last name, Al Sullivan. So underneath this exterior, this kind of tough guy, is a lot more complexity and insecurity and ambivalence. And honestly, he doesn't seem anything like me. I'm a Chinese immigrant's kid, woman. But a lot of me is in him. He's the immigrant wanting to rise. And a little bit, there's a line in there. I don't know if you've gotten it to yet, where this doesn't give anything away. He's like, all these it's like the old fashioned version of woke, all these privileged people telling me that I can't get rich. I want to succeed, and they're all communists that, and so it's,
I think I actually underlined that.
yes, it was one of my, so it was a light touch. Like I didn't want this book to be political, but
It's not.
No, it's not. It's not. It's just a big whodunit. But there are. He's somebody I can really relate to.
So I don't read the books. I'm a film buff. I'm a movie guy. I've watched all the old film noir
Yeah.
movies, and I'm trying to figure out which actor you would have cast in this part from then, and which one you'd cast now.
Oh my gosh.
I also produced a couple of movies, so I'm trying to
Really?
think about how we'd structure this into this. This would be a good movie.
I think it would. It's so cinematic and
Yeah.
it's so beautiful. I think I have a line in there. It was my mom used to love Tyrone Power.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
He was gorgeous.
yeah, but I, I don't know. I don't know. I'm
I
trying to
saw him
think.
a little. I think Tyrone Power was too good looking.
Yeah, I think
I
exactly. A
think you
little
need
more
somebody a little
rugged.
craggier.
Exactly.
And so
Exactly.
we'll
Yeah.
have fun. Right. And then you've got a young woman who's
Miriam.
Miriam, who I'm thinking, could have been Tatum O'Neal.
That's it. We are so on the same page. I loved Paper Moon, right?
Yeah, that's it.
And
She's straight out of that.
that is literally the person I had in my head. I just always loved that whole dynamic.
Yeah.
I can't believe you caught that. That's really funny. I had to watch out to not make her too cutesy, but she's my favorite character in the book. I really liked her.
No, she comes across as strong and independent,
Good.
emotional, helpful. I mean, she's sort of like all the kids you'd like to have.
Yeah,
She's 11 years old.
Right, and she's the wage earner. I mean, she's
Yeah.
because her mom's a mess. So
But you didn't write a political book. Now the other part are the three beautiful daughters,
yes,
or the three beautiful young women,
Yeah.
the patriarchs, and those I was trying to cast as well.
I
There-
know.
That would
They're
be
blonde and beautiful.
Yeah.
There's so many. Oh my gosh! But in the younger generation, I don't know now.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So this is almost hard to cast.
Yeah, yeah. Well, partly it is hard to cast because it's a little old fashioned. You
Yeah.
could think of the actors from the 1940s, 50s. I think it would have been easier.
For those of us who tend to read nonfiction books, and Sarah was joking. Here's the problem in prepping for your show. Usually I read, I've got a lot of my favorite authors on, and they write nonfiction. And so you get a nonfiction book and you can sort of get at the index and read a key chapter and pull it up on Kindle and copy and paste some stuff. Look at what's in the footnotes. You can't do that with a novel.
I know. I can't look
You
at the
can't jump
ending.
ahead. So I can't wait to get back to reading the book.
Thank you.
But I think it's an interesting read for people, who maybe not normally read novels, because it's not only a good story and a good detective tale, but it also tells you about the culture a lot in California and
history.
America and history.
Yeah, I did not know. This is so ignorant, but I did not realize that with Pearl Harbor, the Japanese basically took out the U.S. Navy. They took out all our ships, and almost overnight. So it would have taken too long to fight in the Pacific Theater to build ships on the Atlantic coast. So almost overnight, the San Francisco Bay Area became the largest shipbuilding center in the history of the world, and that's when the Bay Area took on its appearance now, because just people poured in. It's the first time that African Americans actually came to the Bay Area. They all for jobs. And it's something to be really proud of. I mean, they were basically churning out like a battleship every 4 days based on Henry Ford's new factory assembly line techniques. And I mean,
Henry Kaiser used Henry Ford's
Yes.
technique.
yes, exactly. It's fascinating how they did it, and I mean, we wouldn't have won the war without this. And when I was little, I would see Kaiser shipyards, Richmond shipyards, naval, but I didn't pay attention, and I kind of didn't realize how, I mean, it was just a major center. And that's when San Francisco exploded in population. It was a sleepier town before. And so everything changed after that.
Well, this is Bill Walton. This is the Bill Walton Show. I'm here with Professor Amy Chua, and I forgot in the intro that she's also known as the Tiger Mom. She's written. Maybe most famously, she wrote Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, and I went through my library and was taking a look at some of the books that she'd written, and I was surprised how much of this I have underlined. It's a terrific. It's not only a great story about your struggle with your kids, or not struggles, not the right
Yeah.
word, but I guess
Yeah.
it was a battle.
Yes, it was a battle. It was a battle, and it was a struggle, and trying to do the right thing based on kind of immigrant values. But there's a funny line near the end. I feel like these are American values. Don't give up, grit. Respect for elders. But my younger daughter was very rebellious and wouldn't have it from day one. But yeah, that was that changed my life writing that book. I was just completely unknown before that.
Well, you got very well known.
Not necessarily in the best way.
Well, I want to stay with the novel. We'll thread. Well, let's stay with the novel just a bit, but I do want to go to the themes that are in the Tiger Mother book. What else was your purpose in writing this, and what else did you have woven into the plot?
Well, I mean, actually, there are a lot of parallels to today in some ways, and then there are a lot of differences. Um, I really wanted to bring alive some of these historical characters. August Vollmer is the father of American policing. He invented
That was an actual historical
yes.
character.
Oh my
Okay.
God,
Yeah.
famous. I mean, he invented the lie detector and finger printing, everything that you see on TV in these detective shows. And he just lives up the street, or he lived up the street from my parents. He was, I think, an immigrant from Austria, and these days where I teach at Yale, you can't even mention police. I mean, it's actually insane. There are just very significant numbers of people really just want to defund. I mean, just get rid of the police.
They
Or
haven't spent much time in downtown New Haven then.
well, it's just sort of illogical, but um, so it's fun to write a historical novel because you don't have to get into the muck. I'm just describing the way things were. And he was an amazing historical figure, and he was also very honorable. It was he who wanted to bring minorities and women into the police force for the first time. So he did that at Berkeley, just kind of out of a sense of decency. And so it was fun to kind of Julia Morgan is maybe the most famous woman architect in America, and she lived there. She designed Hearst Castle. William Randall Hearst reached out to her. Why? She built the Campanile, not Berkeley's Campanile, that was the only one that survived the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, just engineering wise. So Hearst said, "I want you to design my castle," and it's a monument out there.
So I guess it was the thing that's surprising, and I think you're bringing it in. I'm about 2/3 the way through, and we've discovered that the Chinese laborers turn out to be Japanese laborers, and so Americans thought the Japanese and the Chinese looked exactly the same, I'm sure. And so there was that part. Now, in the third part of the book that I haven't got to, do some of the military political themes, the World War II themes, come into the book?
A little
Because you've got
bit.
Madame Chiang Kai-shek, and
Yeah.
she was there lobbying on behalf of the
Yes.
nationalists
Yes.
against Mao, and you've
Yes.
got a lot of the communists still in the United States already.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm not going to give away part three.
Okay, we'll let that go. So anyway, let me finish the plug here. Kenny, let's get this one up again. We've got Golden Gate, Amy Chua, and it's a novel, and it's a terrific one, and it really is evocative of a golden California in that era.
Yeah. Oh, the chapter about the Golden Gate Bridge going up is one of my favorites. I mean, it was so spectacular. Before that, they thought bridges should be very rigid. Okay, but this was going to be the longest suspension bridge or whatever it was. So
It's
they
a mile
used
long.
yes, and they used over rocky shoals, right? So they used a new technique based on new engineering developments, flexible, a little flexible. And I read all these oral histories of workers hanging, as they were building this thing. So there were these people up, I mean, I don't know how many feet, hundreds of feet up. And there was a small earthquake, and the bridge was not yet finished. And people swung, they thought, to their deaths, right? They were just they fell on the bridge like 100 feet, and then it went back up. And they all lived so it was just kind of a huge engineering feat. And then the oral histories are amazing.
Wow. I
Yeah.
guess about 9 people died making the bridge.
Yeah, a surprise. I mean,
Far fewer than Empire State Building.
yes, I can't believe you know this, but yeah, it was a relatively
Yeah.
small death
That
toll.
was my point.
Yeah,
Considering the magnitude of the effort, it
yeah,
was and
yeah,
the dangerousness.
yeah.
Well, it's so we may have to cut this short. I've got to go finish reading the book. Okay, let's get, control yourself, Bill. One of the themes of your book, of your various books, is the difference in the cultures, whether it's the Asian culture and their subsets within the Asian cultures, and America's culture today and before, and the value systems that people have. And it strikes me that one of the things that makes America so problematic right now is that the value system, Asian, white, or whateverwise, that built America is being demonized, discredited. In fact, they had an exhibition in the Smithsonian 2 years ago, and I somehow got the piece of paper that described it. It was an exhibition of whiteness. And it just, do you remember that?
I heard about it, but I did not see.
Well,
But oh my God, I'm
I'll
sure.
pull up the description for you, but it had all the things that describe whiteness that you didn't want to be, and it was thrift, it was timeliness, it was family, it was faith, it was staying married, it was all these sort of things that I really see as success virtues.
Completely.
And the Tiger Mom, you started with it there. These are success virtues. If you do these things, you will be happy. If you don't do these things, in my view, you're not going to be. And yet that's being demonized.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really upside
And
down
I think we can do
time.
this without politics too.
Absolutely.
I hope. Yeah.
It's an upside down town right now. I mean, I have a student who was a Korean American. She went to West Point and served. She flew Apache helicopters in Afghanistan for 6 years. She came and she was a Democrat. She was apolitical. And in her first day of class, the 16 people, went around, and there was a discussion about the American dream. And somebody said, "Oh, it's based on racism. It's white supremacist." So when it came to my student, she didn't say anything controversial. She said, "Of course, I know there's a lot of terrible problems in this country. Of course, there's racism. But, given that my parents had nothing and I made it to West Point, I got to Yale, and I had, African American friends in the military, I do still believe in the American dream." Bill, she was canceled. Nobody in her small group would talk to her after that, just for saying that she believed in the American dream.
And this was a Yale Law School.
Yes, and it's
Yeah.
only 3 years ago. It's at Yale Law School. And again, she was not political. And she, she ended up joining the Federalist Society and becoming, very active. And I asked her, that's unexpected. Why? You're so not political. You don't. And she said, they're the only people who will talk to me. And same with meritocracy. My parents, I just associate it with America, because if you come from countries, my parents were Chinese, but from the Philippines, so there's so much corruption. You're not rewarded. Yes, my first book, World on Fire, I coined this term market dominant minorities, about these tiny little minorities, like the 1% Chinese minority in Indonesia or Philippines, or 3% Chinese minority in Indonesia, but also, East or Indians in East Africa, or the Lebanese in West Africa, or whites in South Africa or Zimbabwe. And I talk about how it's a very unusual thing because it's different than America. These small ethnic minorities like the Chinese and the Philippines, even though they're only 1% of the population, they control about 60 to 70% of the economy. They're just entrepreneurial,
Well, that was true in Vietnam.
Yes.
And that was one of the things we did not understand.
Yes.
We, America.
You read my book so closely. It was in my most recent book, nonfiction book, Political Tribes. And people did not realize that the Vietnam War, we saw it as this big battle, capitalism versus communism. That's it. What we didn't realize is that almost all the capitalists in Vietnam at the time were all ethnic Chinese. So when America comes in and says, we are going to support capitalism, the majority of poor, many illiterate Vietnamese members of the Vietnamese majority saw this as basically only benefiting this Chinese minority. And that was one of my points, that we have really, basically, our worst foreign policy disasters of the last at least 50 years stems from this kind of ignorance about the unusual or just different ethnic and racial structures that other countries have.
So we don't know anything about the countries, and yet we bring our democracy project. I think that's another theme.
Yes.
That our efforts to the neocon democracy project has been a catastrophe.
Yeah, I predicted in World on Fire in the afterword
20 years ago, over 23
yes,
years ago.
In the afterword to the paperback, it was right when we invaded Iraq, and I predicted. I remember Noah Feldman said the opposite. He said, "Oh, there's not going to be ethnic conflict. The Shias and Sunnis will intermarry," and And I said, no. There's a market dominant minority there, the roughly 14% Sunnis that are just despised by the Shia majority. And if we think that just bringing elections to Iraq is going to lead to peace and prosperity, it's not. And almost to a T, exactly what I predicted happened. Once the Shias came to power, they were so hungry for revenge. They had been oppressed and persecuted by this little minority for centuries. So when you brought in elections, people, they didn't vote for, moderate policies. They voted for, let's confiscate, let's persecute our former overloads. And then the Sunnis, minorities, once they realized, this democracy thing is not going well for us, they joined the insurgency, Al-Qaeda, and then later ISIS, which was a Sunni movement. So all of that we just kind of didn't really know about. General Petraeus was actually very nice to me. I when they asked for blurbs for political tribes, I was so scared. They asked General McChrystal and Petraeus. Oh, it's for political tribes.
Political tribes, yeah.
And they were both so generous. They said, yes, the U.S. made these mistakes. And they both gave me very nice blurbs. So,
well, if you want to be the smartest person, this is the Bill Walton Show, and I'm here with Amy Chua, and we're talking about her many interesting books and how perceptive she's been, and perceptive early, a long time ago. So if you're at your next cocktail party, if you're still doing cocktails, although that's not politically correct, read this book, because what you understand from The World on Fire is how we don't understand the tribal and the cultural, ethnic divisions in the countries that we supposedly want to come and fix, and that bringing our ideals to them forcefully through our democracy promotion efforts has been and will be a disaster.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, it's true. I called Venezuela.
I said at the outset,
yeah.
Amy Chua's got a new book out. I said, my God, this is great. Anyway, continue. I interrupted you.
Oh, no, you were right. Like in Venezuela, I also kind of called it right in World on Fire. That was in 2002. Almost just kind of predicted what would happen with Hugo Chavez. So it's been kind of a sad kind of indication, because a lot of these places are total messes now.
Well, yeah. I don't know if I should address this much, but 45 years ago, I was a banker at Continental Bank in Chicago, and we ended up going on a trip to Greece with a bunch of other bankers it was a social vacation, and we were in Athens. And I said, we really need to have a foreign policy that makes the world safe for great vacations. And by that standard, we have failed utterly.
Oh my gosh!
I mean, the whole world has gone up in arms against each other, not just against Americans, but against each other.
Yeah. It's a messy moment.
We need another big idea. Is your next book going to be on the big idea that we need?
First of all, I think that I'm just hoping that the pendulum is going to swing back. I think, things went so off the rails in this country. I mean, it's just, I'm an optimist, despite all these problems. And I think that we, there are a lot of flaws in the American system, but we have an ethnically and racially neutral constitution. It's based on our founding is based on principles, not on blood, like China or even France. These are blood-based nations. So I actually think we have the best institutions for self-correction. Admittedly, it's you're not really seeing this right now, but I think over time there are mechanisms. Like people want to get rid of the electoral college, right? But that is so short-sighted. When I studied developing countries, one of the things I noticed is, oh, Ecuador has had 32 constitutions in the last 20 years. And one of the things, it feels very frustrating, but
Yeah.
we have lasting institutions. Sometimes it feels a little bit like, okay, nothing can happen, but it's also a form of stability. So when you hear a lot of people now saying, oh, we should get rid of this, let's get rid of the Supreme Court, let's get rid of the Electoral College. And I'm always like, not politically, but just looking comparatively at the other countries I've seen. I'm like, let's not take for granted, a really kind of impressive system that the founders put together a long time ago.
So the principles of limited government, rule of law, not by man, they're pretty good. The problem is you can't superimpose those on cultures where people are not. That's not in their DNA.
Yeah, or just majority rule. What we
Yeah.
were exporting was kind of a weird caricature of democracy. It's like, hey, everybody, let's have elections, including people who,
Well,
are very susceptible to just crazies.
Well, the Greeks had the democracy. They didn't have a republic. And the Greeks, evidently, in the Peloponnesian Wars, anytime a Greek general would go out and fight, I can't remember, it was either the Spartans or before that, there was another group. Anyway, anytime the generals would lose a battle, they'd hold an election in Athens and by majority vote committed the generals to death. So the majority was out of control. And
Right.
so you take everything to a majority vote and you end up with mob rule.
Exactly. Especially, yeah, that's exactly right. And this was very apparent in developing countries. Like again, my parents were Chinese, but from the Philippines. And there was a lot of just most people are very poor and not educated. So yeah, I think our democracy is at least ideally a lot more than just majority rule.
What are your classes that you teach at Yale? I'll start out by saying one of your classes has a 98% recommendation from the kids that have taken it. And it's like the only class that comes remotely close to that.
Yeah, I teach international business transactions and I teach
Now, that sounds really
contracts.
boring.
They both sound boring, but I
What's the other one? I interrupted you.
contracts sounds
Okay.
even more boring.
All right.
But I have I do something kind of unusual. I can't believe I have to do this now, and I can't believe it's unusual. But on my syllabus, I have a banner that says this class is, will seek to promote lively debate across all political backgrounds. And basically, if you take this class, you have to give people the benefit of the doubt. So if somebody says something that sounds racist or xenophobic or misogynist or if you're going to take this class, you have to civilly raise your hand and express your worries, and then have the other side. And it's so much tenser than it used to be. But Bill, it works. I have the most diverse class, but not. I don't mean by diverse. I mean in the
You mean
deepest sense.
intellectually diverse.
Yes, I have very left wing people. I have lots of minorities, but I have many record numbers of conservatives. And again, it's not as fun as it used to be. I remember when my student JD Vance was my student. We had these like lively, feisty debates. His best friend was a lesbian woman at the other end of the political spectrum. Then people would go out for a beer afterwards. Now there are no friendships across political lines. You can't. If you even talk, if you're a liberal and you talk to a member of the Federalist Society, not even agree with them, just talk to them, or you will be labeled FedSoc adjacent and basically socially shunned.
FedSoc adjacent.
And socially shunned. And so one of the things I used to love most about teaching is seeing kind of cross pollination and people moving towards the middle, like, let me explain. And it's just so much harder now. But in my classes, yes, it's hard. It's hard. I get scared now, like I don't know why I have to be so worried, but I'm like, I'm going to air these views, and I just hold my breath. I do think that my classes are a little self-selected. I think the people who really hate me or are really extreme won't take my class.
It's like Amazon book reviews in a way. The people that already like you are going to read. But it's the division's profound in not only at Yale, but I think in all the major law schools. And my background's in finance, not law. But it isn't. What's the principle of in law of being a lawyer where both sides deserve representation?
Yeah.
What
I
is
mean,
that called? Is
well,
that
there's the
what is?
adversarial system
Okay,
with
the
due
adversarial
process.
system.
Yeah. Yeah.
But aren't we reaching a point now where there's a school of thought inside Yale and other law schools that the adversarial system is out the window because that other side is not worthy defending?
Yes, it's a really new development. It's a bit generational. So if you ask Democrats in their 50s, age 50 and above or 40 and above, whatever their views, they largely believe in free speech, the freedom of speech. But today the progressives, it's very generational. Many will say no. Free speech leads to racist outcomes. It favors white supremacy, and diversity should be a higher value. And my colleague that you should think about having on, Tony Kronman, he survived too. He was always a progressive, but he wrote a book called
Tony Kronman?
Yes, he was our former dean. He is
Cronman?
Yes,
And what-
Kronman.
And what's his book called?
The Assault on American Excellence.
Okay.
And he just straight out comes out and says all these things. And he's also a Renaissance man, like you. He has read everything. Unlike me, he also philosophy guru.
But you write a lot more books.
I don't know about that. But
You're
they're
very
more
prolific. Anyway, continue.
Yeah,
So the
yeah.
assault of American excellence.
Yes. So, but the idea is there is a lot of silencing right now. My students will come to my office hours and they are afraid. I don't get it. I mean, they are afraid to say their real views. And I am not talking about controversial views,
Yeah.
right? I'm talking about the most basic things what? I'm like, what? So now this is a second best solution. I assign provocative readings from all across the political spectrum, very conservative to very left wing. And I ask my students in the class I'm teaching now to do 1-page reaction papers. What's your response to this? And then I have these students of all political stripes share their views. But now many students will only ask me to read their views anonymously. If they're going to be honest, they want me to read them anonymously, which I do. And it's actually great because you see a lot of people nodding, but nobody, but can you imagine these are brave, the best, and they're such smart students. They are afraid to express these views. And I think it was Barry Weiss said, why? And I said, it's a really good question. And I asked a student and he said, dating. It's dating. I want to have fun and nobody will, I don't want to have no friends whatsoever. So it's not worth it. It's not worth it.
So one of the things I wanted, there's never enough time. We were going to have you back and maybe have you back on with Tony Kronman.
Oh, I love that.
We'd have a really interesting dialogue. Tribalism is real, I believe, and I think it explains an awful lot about why we're not successful in promoting abstract principles into places where it's not going to find fertile ground. And I also believe as part of tribalism, nationalism is real. And
Yes.
You look at the experiment in the EU with Brussels and European government and all that sort of thing. There seems to be a lot of pushback now in Europe where people want to be French. They don't want to, or they want to be Italian or
Yes.
Spanish. They don't want to be European.
Yeah.
And so that's all giving rise to a populism.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that brings Trump into play.
Yeah.
And you've written about, I think in Political Tribes, you point out as long as in 2011, which is 13 years ago, 12, whatever, close to it, over half of white Americans believe that they've replaced blacks as the primary victim of discrimination. And it's gotten worse.
Oh
since
my
then.
gosh. Well, I mean, just think about college applications, and this is just, it's just basic psychology. If you tell a group of people, your people you have to just apologize. You're terrible people, whether it's whites or Asians or, what do you think their reaction is going to be? Somebody's going to come along and say, no, actually, you should be proud of being white, or whites have done a lot of good things. What do you want to hear? It was such a mistake to make this move, just attacking whites. It just even strategically, it was such a bad move. But I have a lot of younger friends whose kids are going through the college application process now. And,
I've heard
I
you're a fabulous mentor.
Thank you.
Fabulous
Yeah,
mentor.
I really I enjoy it. I actually enjoy I just enjoy students. They're so interesting, and especially the ones that are feeling kind of like they can't speak or they just don't fit in. I mean, I went through a lot of rejections and failures in my life, so I'm good at helping people through those moments. But yes, I mean, I think that statistic has gotten worse. People, certainly on the Yale campus, it's my Caucasian students. Like, sometimes they just feel like they have a target on their back, Um, and I just
Well,
spoke to one woman who felt like that.
well, it's a pendulum that's got to swing back,
It has to.
or else it's going to lead to
Well, I
terrible
think it has
trouble.
to do with these college applications because I'm talking about liberal parents, okay? Just people who always wanted to be a very, very progressive, but they are watching their kids who studied very hard and they have these amazing numbers who 10 years ago, 20 years ago would have gotten, into great schools. So, they wanted them to go to Harvard or Yale or Columbia. And yes, you can't always do that. But I am talking about students, Caucasian students, who don't even get into Vanderbilt or Georgetown. They're only getting into community college, right? Because of this. And I've seen so many of my friends, they're very upset. And I think that is going to, for better or for worse, that's where the pendulum is going to come back. Like, just because it's not political at this point. I'm talking about, people living in Connecticut, they're all Democrats. But they're outraged and they're like, this is not fair.
So the pendulum has to swing. I hope it swings in a positive way. Maybe
I
this.
can't go any further.
I'm looking at this not pile, but this excellent lineup of books here. I'm thinking your next book needs to be on the solution.
Yeah, it's tricky right now. It's tricky.
I don't know whether we can pick it up on the mic, but wife Sarah is here, and she has just said that forget the next book. Read this book. I agree. I agree.
I love your wife.
Well, she reads these books. We go back and forth between a place in town and a place out in Virginia. She reads books out loud. And we tried to read this, but you can't speed read out loud. So we're only 2/3 of the way through. We need to wrap up here, but I'm just trying to think how to best summarize your. There are not many people like you in the Yale faculty.
No, I definitely feel very, totally like an outsider.
Well, hang in there.
Thank
We
you.
need you. We need you.
Thank you. On the good news front, I think there's a silent majority. When I told you that I was going to put what I put on my syllabus, like, we are going to have lively debate, no silencing in this class. One of my colleagues said, you're going to get like 8 people, I have the longest wait list. On top of the 60 people I admitted, I had a 100-person wait list. And this is at Yale, supposedly crazy, so I think there is a silent majority of people who actually want to be more moderate, want to be more generous. And it's just, somehow it's been hijacked by the most extreme voices. So I told you I'm an optimist.
What about one? We need to close out here, but China today, China Communist Party, it's looming. It's a problem. It's a problem for Chinese. It's a problem for us. It's a problem for the countries surrounding. I mean, what's your take on what's happening in China?
Well, I'm very sad about it. When I was little, China, I grew up in Indiana, like you,
West Lafayette.
West Lafayette.
Yeah.
And, people always say, how was it terrible? I was the only Asian kid in my school, the neighborhood. And it wasn't terrible. I mean, obviously we stuck out. We had funny haircuts. I had an accent back then. But, the system really worked for me. I was a hard worker. I was a great student and people liked us, And so today, ironically, because China is powerful, back then, China was weak, right? So
Right.
Nobody was threatened by China and nobody was threatened by Asian Americans. But today we've got this terrible situation where China is the enemy, the country, and then Asian Americans within the university system are viewed as taking all the college spots, right? So It's not just me. My students, my Asian American students, my Chinese American students are there. It's a tough time for them. Also on our campus, if you try to complain about anything like, oh, Asian Americans are being, elderly Asians are in San Francisco are being like punched and kicked. If you say that, people will be, oh, stop complaining.
Now, still that's happening?
It's less so now. During the pandemic, it
But
was really terrible.
what's your take? Is in China, you're a student of culture. You're obviously a student of Chinese culture. Is it the Communist Party, or is it something? I mean, it can't be the Chinese people. It's got to
Oh,
be
you mean
what
the country itself?
Yeah, what the party's
Oh my
done. What the
gosh.
party's done. I mean,
It's an extreme. So my students who are from China are all dismayed. Many of them are not going back, and many of people have left China just to come here. It's a cracking down. It's very different than it was like even 6 years ago. The pandemic, the way they handled that, it was people were kind of locked in for a long time.
COVID.
But the real answer to your question is I've kind of lost access. When I went to China for the first time in 1979 with my father, when the country first opened up, it was a poor country, it was all communist, and we were welcomed back, and we wanted the country to do well. And then over the next 20 years, China just opened up, and Yale had all these programs, and all my Caucasian students were learning Chinese. And we have really reverted back to a time of great hostility on both sides. I've interacted with people from China who a group came to talk at Yale, and they just said, your media is so biased. Because remember, they don't have free press. That's why it's so important that we have a free press. But what they hear is the opposite of what we hear.
Totally. Yes,
oh my
total
gosh.
silence.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. Next time I want to talk about China. I want to dig deeper. We have cultural issues here we need to resolve. We also need to resolve how we think about China, what to do about it. And I think you have those answers.
I don't know about
hopefully.
the answers.
So this has been the Bill Walton Show, and I've been here delightfully with the famous and terrific Amy Chua. And I'm being instructed to hold up the book, and we're the only reason I'm happy to be ending this show, the only reason, is I get to finish reading the book right away, which I'll do this afternoon. So anyway, Amy, thanks. Thanks so much. We'll hope to have you back on, and thanks for all your work. And you've made a tremendous contribution to how we understand the world, and so keep it up.
Thank you so much. This was so fun.
Okay, great. It's been the Bill Walton Show, and hope you've enjoyed it. I think we've had another wide-ranging and hopefully penetrating, insightful conversation about culture and political tribes and Yale Law School and what's going on there. Anyway, hope you'll join us again next time. As you know, we're on all the major platforms, podcast platforms, and YouTube and Rumble. We're on Substack and CPAC now and Monday nights. And send us your comments to thebillwaltonshow.com and also on Substack, and we'll take them into our process and hopefully respond in something you like in the future. So anyway, thanks for joining, and we'll be back to you soon. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Want more? Click the subscribe button or head over to thebillwaltonshow.com to choose from over 100 episodes. You can also learn more about our guest on our Interesting People page. And send us your comments. We read every one, and your thoughts help us guide the show. If it's easier for you to listen, check out our podcast page and subscribe there. In return, we'll keep you informed about what's true, what's right, and what's next. Thanks for joining.